watching Cooking with Diane. I'm Diane, and today we're going to be talking about the secrets to the best chocolate chip cookies. This video is for you if either you're new to baking or maybe you've tried to bake a few things but they never turn out quite right. Most baking recipes assume that you know certain things that you don't know until someone tells you. So what we're going to do today is we're going to follow the original Nestle Toll House chocolate chip cookie recipe. And we're going to walk through it together. And I'm going to tell you all of those hidden secrets that are in each step that might not necessarily be written out in the recipe. This will make sure that your chocolate chip cookies turn out perfectly every time. So first, I want to make sure I have everything I need within reach. So I have my recipe. I like to print it out on paper. If you like to follow along on your iPad or your computer or your phone or the back of the chocolate chips package, you do you. But make sure that you have the recipe available because it's really important that we follow it. The first part of the recipe is ingredients, and I've already taken out all of the ingredients I need, so they're right here, ready to go, but I haven't measured them yet. We'll do that together. Then for equipment, measuring cups. So when you're making cookies, at least using an American recipe, you're going to want measuring cups that look like this, like an actual cup that has a handle. You don't want to use a measuring cup that looks like this for this kind of recipe. This is a liquid measuring cup, so it's really for things that are liquid. You're also going to need some measuring spoons. Recipes say things like teaspoon, tablespoon, half teaspoon. Those refer to actual measurements that are in these spoons. And we're going to be measuring our ingredients into 2 bowls at first and then combining them. So you're going to need one mixing bowl with a sifter. The kind with the really fine mesh is best to use for this. And then a bigger measuring bowl. If you have an electric mixer, you could use that, but I'm going into this assuming you're a beginner and maybe you don't have all of the fancy baking equipment that you might see online. So for mixing, all we're going to need is a wooden spoon. And then later for scooping the cookies, you can either use one of these cute little ice cream scoops. A smaller size is best for cookies unless you want enormous cookies. If you don't have one of those, 2 regular old spoons will do. So let's get started. The first instruction on the recipe is preheat oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. So preheating your oven is usually the first instruction in any baking recipe because it's really important that your oven is hot and ready to go before your cookies are ready to be baked. So before I even start measuring out any ingredients, I'm going to turn my oven on and set it to bake at 375 degrees. On to step number 2. Combine flour, baking soda, and salt in a small bowl. So what that means is we're going to mix together our dry ingredients. Dry ingredients are anything that's going in the recipe that's like dry and powdery. So the kind of flour we're using is all-purpose flour. And we're going to measure 2 1/4 cups. So this is a 1 cup measure. And I like to keep my flour in a bin like this so that I can really just dip my whole measuring cup in there. Come up with a heaping cup full of flour and then level it off. So I have exactly 1 cup of flour. And I like to sift my flour as I measure it. This makes sure that I don't get any lumps. So that's 2 1 cups and 1/4 cup. But if you don't want to sift your dry ingredients, you don't have to. So we're using 1 teaspoon baking soda. And baking soda is different from baking powder. So make sure you're reading the label and using the right ingredient. I want to find the measuring spoon that says 1 teaspoon and just like the cup, I'm going to measure a heaping teaspoon and then level it off. And it says 1 teaspoon salt. Really, any kind of salt will work for this. I'm using kosher salt. So in order to sift your dry ingredients, you just give your sifter a little shake right over the bowl. And your flour will shake through the sifter into the bowl. And if you have any lumps at the end, just kind of push them through with your hand. That's our dry ingredients. Easy, right? We're just going to set them over to the side while we mix our wet ingredients. So the next instruction on the recipe is beet butter, granulated sugar, brown sugar, and vanilla extract in large mixer bowl until creamy. Add eggs one at a time, beating well after each addition. So let's talk about butter. It's really important that your butter is soft when you're making cookies. You can't just go to the fridge and pull out your cold butter and start mixing your dough. I took this butter out about 3 or 4 hours ago. You could take your butter out the night before. I also, whenever I take my butter out, I take my eggs out. It's not quite as important, but it's good to work with room temperature ingredients. Your butter needs to be soft enough that you can squeeze it like this. You don't want it to be melting, but it does need to be very, very soft. Otherwise, it's not going to mix with the sugar. And I promise you, your butter's not going to go bad if it sits on the counter for a couple hours. So I'm going to put my 2 sticks of softened butter into my larger mixing bowl. And another note about butter is that it usually is sold in 2 kinds, salted or unsalted. So make sure you're reading the label really carefully when you buy butter, and buy the unsalted butter. Because we already put salt in this recipe. We don't need more salt coming from the butter. To the butter, we're going to add 3/4 cup each of granulated sugar and light brown sugar. So granulated sugar, you can buy the natural kind, you can buy the kind that's just like Domino, but it should be pretty like white and powdery. So that's 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. For light brown sugar, that's just sugar that's had molasses added to it, so it's going to be a softer, stickier consistency. When you're measuring brown sugar, you actually want to kind of press it into the measuring cup so it's packed down. This is the only ingredient you pack into the measuring cup. Then for our vanilla, you want to make sure you're using pure vanilla extract. There are imitation vanilla extracts out there, and they're not going to taste as good. Pure vanilla extract is more expensive, but it's really worth it. You will notice the difference in taste if you leave it out or use an imitation. So when you're measuring a liquid ingredient, just measure it all the way to the tippy top of your measuring spoon. To mix your wet ingredients, the recipe says beat your butter, your sugar, and your vanilla extract until creamy. This is also known as creaming your butter and sugar. And this is why it's so important that your butter be soft, is so that it can mix completely with the sugar. So I start just by using the back of the spoon to kind of mash the soft butter into the sugar. And I want to keep doing that until everything's completely incorporated into one lump. Once you feel like things are mostly incorporated, you can start stirring, and you want to stir pretty hard. It says beat it, so that means put some muscle into it. Now we're going to add the eggs one at a time. Oops, don't want to get any shell in there. And eggs are mostly water and butter is mostly fat, so you you want to mix pretty well to make sure that they mix together. Your arm will probably get tired from doing this. I know mine is. And so once you add the egg, you'll notice that your wet mixture is a little bit lighter in color. Once one egg is incorporated, you can add the second egg. All right, so this is our wet ingredients: the butter, the eggs, the sugars, and the vanilla extract. And they're all mixed together really well into this lovely creamy mixture. Now we can move on to the next step. It says the next step is gradually beat in flour mixture. So gradually to me means maybe I add half the flour, stir that in, and then when that's mostly absorbed, I'll stir in the rest of the flour. Once you start adding flour to liquids, it's possible to overmix it because you don't want the flour to develop gluten. That'll make tough cookies. So we're just going to mix this part until the flour is incorporated. So when your dough is like 90% mixed, but maybe there's still some dry flour patches in there, you can go ahead and add your chocolate chips. And this recipe is great because it just uses one whole package, so you don't even have to measure it. Oh, they smell so good. And now your mixture is probably pretty tough. It's going to be difficult to mix, but you can do it. Just mix it until all of those little dry patches of flour are gone. That's it. So the next step is drop my rounded tablespoon onto ungreased baking sheets. So this is my baking sheet. It's pretty long, but it fits in my oven. It can have an edge or it can not have an edge. And you don't need to grease it or put anything on it. Just right onto the baking sheet is fine. So with your 2 spoons, you're just going to take a little dollop, about a tablespoon's worth of dough, and push it onto the sheet. And it doesn't matter too much how big your cookies are, as long as they're all about the same size. And when you're putting them onto the sheet tray, you do want to make sure that they're all about 2 inches apart from each other, because if you think about how big a cookie is, the dough's going to spread out, and you don't want all of your cookies to bake into each other, into one giant cookie. So now I've got my 2 sheets of cookies ready to go, and the next step is bake for 9 to 11 minutes or until golden brown. So my oven is preheated, and the instructions say 9 to 11 minutes. So how do I know what time to choose? The reason they're going to give you a range of time is because every oven is different. Some ovens are hotter than others. So unless you know your oven really well, it's good to set your timer for the lowest amount of time in a recipe. That's 9 minutes. And then we'll look at the cookies and decide, are they golden brown? Do they look done? If they don't look done after 9 minutes, we can always bake them longer. That's better than setting your timer to 11 minutes and maybe they come out burnt. So in they go. So these are my cookies after 9 minutes. They still look kind of doughy on the top, like they still have that shiny cookie dough look, and they're not golden brown. They're very pale actually. So that tells me I'm going to need to cook them for longer. You might also notice that my cookies have gotten different amounts of cooked. These ones spread more, and these ones are a little bit smaller. That's because of where they were on the oven. This tray was on the bottom, and this tray was on the top. So I'm going to put my cookies back in for a couple more minutes. and I'm going to switch where they were in the oven. I'm going to put this tray on the top and this tray on the bottom. How much longer you cook your cookies if they're not done when you take them out is totally up to you and your intuition. So I could cook them just the 2 more minutes that the recipe says to get to that 11-minute mark. Or because they still looked pretty doughy, I'm going to probably cook them for 3 or 4 more minutes because I know my oven is a little bit slow. So now my cookies have baked for 14 minutes total, which is a little bit more than the recipe says, but knowing my oven, that makes sense to me. You can see they're a lovely golden brown color and evenly golden brown all around. So now I'm going to turn off my oven and let these cool on the pan for just a couple minutes. They're really soft and fragile when they first come out of the oven, so I don't want to try to lift them with a spatula until they've had a chance to cool. Once your cookies have cooled slightly, they don't have to be completely cool, you can transfer them to these racks. These are actually called cooling racks. And that'll help them cool more evenly all the way. Sometimes if you try to let them cool all the way on the pan, they end up sticking to the pan a little bit. So these are our perfect, foolproof chocolate chip cookies. So thank you so much for watching Cooking with Diane. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.